Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second annual Birdy Awards, starring your host, Zach Worden and Jori Negin-Shecter.
All right. Hello and welcome into the second annual Bird's Eye View Podcast Awards. We are here today to give out some various players of the year, most enjoyable player to watch. We got a ton of awards lined up for you today. The second time that we've done this, of course, last year we had maybe a little bit more expansive of a ballot, but this year it's just Jori and I who filled out our best Blue Jays memories from the 2024 season that was. If you are fans of Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and Bowden Francis, stay tuned. This is the episode for you. Before we get into that, of course, we are here on Tuesday, October 8th. I'm Zach Worden, joined as always by Jori Negin-Shecter, and the postseason is well underway. The Toronto Blue Jays offseason is also underway, unfortunately. But Jori, how have you been enjoying the playoffs so far?
Well, postseason baseball has been everything it has been cracked up to be and more. A highly enjoyable experience. But I mean, I'm here for the birdies. I'm here to hear all
Yes,
snazzed
if
up.
you're watching on YouTube, Jori has got his birdie best on for this episode today.
Exactly. But I will say one thing. I will say is that the Tigers, man, they are not beating those Team of Destiny allegations.
The gritty Tigers, they got the vibes. Tarek Skubal, man,
Monster.
If you could build a pitcher in a lab, he might be what you would come out with.
Pretty close.
Yeah,
he's nice.
It's very impressive what they're doing. It's been a really fun story for them, and I think it was they had the same record as the Blue Jays, like shortly before the trade deadline. So
yeah, one team went 30-7, and the other one sold off their pieces, and it did not go very well.
Yeah. Anyways, we're here for the awards, so let's dive into it. Both of us have submitted our ballots. I have compiled it. A little peek behind the curtain. I have it all up here. Jori is not aware of who are our winners, who are our losers, and let's get into it. What do you think we should start with, Jori? I think we should start with reliever of the year.
All right, we can go off with reliever of the year
because as we mentioned in our last episode with the 7 most important stories of the Blue Jays season, the bullpen very disappointing. So I think this was one of the tougher categories to fill out our ballot for. But let's get right into it. Our 2024 Blue Jays reliever of the year is Yenesis Cabrera.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that tracks as far as the talent in the bullpen goes, because he might not have been the best guy, but he was the only guy that basically went wire to wire, and the only one at that with a semi-respectable ERA. He was not my first pick by any means, but he earned my second place nod. I suspect it's something similar for you.
He was second place on my ballot as well, and since we varied in our first place picks, he ended up with the most combined points to come away with our reliever of the year award. Congratulations to Yenesis Cabrera.
Yenesis Cabrera.
He just to kind of put it out there a little bit, he led the team in relief innings pitched, 62.2, had a 3.59 ERA, and after a really tough beginning to the year, he really turned it on. I think if you look at his splits for the season, he had a 6.35 ERA in March and April. And then in May, he went 2.45. In June, he had a 3.27. And then in July, a 1.74. In August, a 1.08. And then in September, October, a 5.91. So, beware reliever ERA, sure. But one of the more consistent relievers, and I think they used him in just about every single situation to get righties, to get lefties, kind of to be their fireman this year. So I think a well-deserved honor for Yenesis in a season where the Blue Jays bullpen did not have much consistency. He was one of them.
No, there was not a lot to celebrate in terms of the Blue Jays bullpen this year, but a big shout out to Yenesis Cabrera, just on the basis that, like I said, he kind of went wire to wire with the Jays and is probably one of maybe 2 or 3 guys that I feel there's a greater than 75% certainty he's on the Blue Jays next year. Pending a trade, of course, but there's not a lot of guys like that, specifically the bullpen, I mean, that I would say there's a good likelihood that they end up part of this team next year. Even a guy like Jordan Romano, maybe they're scared off by the arm and maybe he just gets non-tendered. Genesis Cabrera has enough team control, had enough success this year, and has enough of a track record as a Blue Jay that he will be part of the Blue Jays next season for sure.
Yes. He will. I think I would put the likelihood that he is in the Blue Jays bullpen in 2025 at like 90-95%. So
He will be there.
let's bang through this ballot because we both had almost completely different ballots. I mean, Cabrera was the only same name that we put on each of our ballots. So our second place finishers in this were, of course, both of our first place votes. And they tied, of course, point wise. So for me, I had Jimmy Garcia as my winner as the Blue Jays reliever of the year, and you had one Ryan Yarbrough, two players that did not cross over on the Blue Jays at any point this season. So why did you select Ryan Yarbrough as your pick?
Well, there's two answers to this. The somewhat real answer is that I forgot Jimmy Garcia existed. No, not actually, but I kind of figured that, he only spent half the year with the Blue Jays, and ultimately at the end of the day, his results are really good and he fetched a solid return, but there was the injury bug there for a while. Like in terms of just sheer volume, he was good, but he didn't really do a ton meaningfully. I picked Ryan Yarbrough, and I think part of that is just that he was kind of a bit of a fireman, a bit of an everyman, a bit of a swingman for this Blue Jays team. Had a lot of success when the bullpen was arguably at its most putrid, and pitched a couple of, spot starts type of thing. Like, listen, was all of his contribution in the form of relief innings? Maybe not, but just the fact that he was so effective, like an ERA in the low twos, and the fact that he was doing it, like the Ryan Yarbrough of old that used to eat the Blue Jays alive, to me, that earned the first place vote for me.
Yeah, I think what Yarbrough did was really impressive as far as making himself look like an appealing option for the Blue Jays to bring back in 2025. He's their only free agent eligible player, and I think the innings that he ate in the second half were really important just for the Blue Jays rotation and bullpen overall. I mean, can you imagine watching the second half Blue Jays without the 31 innings that Ryan Yarbrough provided?
I mean, that's probably 31 innings to some combination of Nick Robertson and Brett DeGus and various other names that didn't get filled out in the 53 player Sporkle.
Yes, guys that you're maybe not super interested in watching pitch.
Well,
So
you gave Jimmy that love, so why
yeah,
don't you give me
so
a little bit into that?
so I think Jimmy, like, I mean, it's pretty. I think kind of in the same boat. Obviously, he didn't pitch the whole season with the Blue Jays and had some injury trouble, but I think just the pure dominance that he showed this season when he was on the Blue Jays. I mean, at the beginning of the year, he was their entire bullpen, right? Romano and Swanson were out. Chad Green was solid this year, and I think we'll get into him in a second. But I think Jimmy was just the pure best reliever that pitched for the Blue Jays this season. And I know like he kind of had some struggles going to Seattle, but what he did, making himself into a guy who I think the Blue Jays fan base like had maybe some negative conceptions about or some wrong conceptions about like his talent level, and just to come out and be a guy who didn't really give up hits, was kind of that dude that came in and got outs. He was a closer for them for a little bit, was kind of the guy that, John Schneider early in the season, Blue Jays were in trouble. He's pressing the Jimmy Garcia button. So I think for him pitching for the Blue Jays while they were still competitive, obviously the injury kind of marred the end of his tenure with Toronto and probably affected him a little bit into his time with Seattle. But I think just the pure dominance that he had, I think he was the most talented reliever who performed the best for the Blue Jays this season. And even if it didn't extend through the second half because he was on a different team, I just think his contributions were above and beyond for a Blue Jays bullpen that didn't really have above and beyond contributions this season.
Yeah, and that's a totally fair assessment of basically his season, right? He was their best reliever for, big parts of the year. And that, I mean, that is a fair assessment in terms of calling him the reliever of the year. I think I differ on the fact that just it was, truncated by injuries,
Yeah.
and ultimately didn't really mean all that much at the end.
Yes. All right. Let's move down onto both of our third place picks. We'll start with mine because obviously yours is very unique. We'll say that. But I gave my third place slot to Chad Green. Kind of the same thing for me with him and Genesis Cabrera. I kind of debated between the two. I think Cabrera's innings were just a little bit more important to the Blue Jay season. Obviously, Chad Green um faltered at the end of the year, to put it lightly. I mean, in September, he completely fell apart. He gave up 11 runs in September in 8 and 2/3 innings. Completely the strikeouts went away. But before that, he was outstanding. I mean, the peripherals probably weren't great, so it was probably easy to see a little bit of that regression coming. But for him to hold a sub 2 ERA through August was really impressive, and again, really important as kind of emerging as the Blue Jays closer in a year when that shouldn't have been the expectations of him. I think just the run prevention aspect of his game for the majority of the season was really impressive. And even if it wasn't backed by what you need from a late game closer per se, I just think that he did provide a lot of important innings for this Blue Jays team. And he's a guy that I think you probably feel pretty good about being like a seventh inning guy if you need.
Yeah, I think I didn't include him on my ballot, but that was more of almost a bit of a protest, and we'll get into that specifically. But to me, the peripheral is always saying one thing when the ERA said another. I never really fell in love with him. And I know that was kind of the sentiment across the board throughout our podcast. That was the case for basically most of the Blue Jays bullpen, right? They really lacked a lot of high leverage, really electric arms for the bulk of the season. And, Green had that ERA in the ones for a period there. And then, of course, it just comes apart at the seams at the end. But that to me was what he was all year. He just had a 100% left on base rate and hadn't given up a home run or something like that, right? Like there was a lot of stuff out of his control that was falling his way. So I was never really too comfortable with him when he was on the mound. It never really felt like he was like a guy for them in the way that, people would talk about him like he was still the Yankees version of Chad Green. So that to me is why I did not have him on my ballot, even though in reality he probably was the third best relief option for this Blue Jays team in some capacity, or maybe fourth, whatever. I mean, do we want to get into who I put on there for my third pick? Because it was, like I said, a bit of a protest vote.
I mean, I was gonna say I'm about to give you the floor here because Jory's third place reliever for these Toronto Blue Jays was one Isaiah Kiner-Falefa.
Listen, you signed a guy to be a utility guy. He's gonna be a utility guy. Listen, the Blue Jays bullpen was so horrendously bad this year that I looked through the options. I looked at who was on the roster. I looked at the guys, and I was like, no one here was good. They all, to varying degrees, were hot garbage. So I'm not really in a situation where I'm prepared to, honor these guys, even by default, because you know what? That was like historically the worst bullpen in Blue Jays history. There has never been a bullpen that bad by ERA, if I recall, at least for a long time in the season. It was this way, and it might have ended that way. This bullpen was hot garbage. So yeah, of course I'm not going to give a vote to a Chad Green or an Eric Swanson because they were garbage this year, and for different reasons. A guy like Swanson, obviously there was a lot of baggage coming into the season, so he gets a pass, whatever. IKF was a good soldier. He wasn't really going to get a lot of votes in terms of other spots because he got traded. But I mean, like, if we're being honest, he probably was among the MVP candidates. I didn't put him on the MVP ballot for me, and we'll get into that, I'm sure, in a little while. But like, this team sucked. So what are we doing? Like, listen, not to be like some kind of boomer participation medal, all that crap, but nobody deserved any love here except for like maybe Jimmy Garcia, but I don't even know if he does. This bullpen sucked, and so that's why in protest, but Isaiah kind of left in my third slot.
It's kind of funny because I mean, reliever WAR is maybe not the most great statistic, I would say, but when you look at the Blue Jays bullpen relievers by WAR, by Fangraphs WAR. I mean, Isaiah kind of left. It's only 2 innings pitched, so like, duh.
Your
But
mileage may
the
vary,
fact that
but
he had a better F war than Bowden Francis as a reliever, than Trevor Richards as a reliever, than Tim Meza, than Jordan Romano, than Genesis Cabrera had a negative F war as a reliever this year, which, I mean, he had a
And that's
3.59
your
ERA
reliever
over
of the year.
he had a
Like
3.59 ERA over like 60 innings. So again, this is why I say reliever war is maybe not the
the best.
greatest
But
stat.
still, it speaks to the fact that this bullpen sucked like hot donkey balls.
Yeah.
So Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, congratulations on your third place, your third place reliever of the year vote.
All right, let's move on. Let's go to our pitcher of the year because we'll stick on the mound here. A very interesting ballot, I think, from us varying on this one. Our pitcher of the year combined, based on the point system, is none other than Bowden Francis.
Yeah, I feel like that's not the most shocking development per se, but I mean, if you came into the year, remember how the that quote from Chris Bassett at the beginning of the year, he goes, "If Bowden Francis ended up our ace, if Ricky Tima ended up our ace, none of us would be surprised." And it was kind of like, that meme with the three dragons, or that meme of the LeBron and that other guy where they're dancing and two of them are LeBron and one of them's this like random TikTok guy. Bowden Francis was that random TikTok guy until about April, and then turned into prime Roy Halladay or prime Kevin Gosman or prime Dave Steve. Actually, is probably the actual name that I should be throwing out there, because this guy became unhittable. So to me, an easy pick for pitcher of the year.
Yeah, so we differed on our number one here. So you had Bowden first, I had Bowden second, which is obviously the combined points ended up having him in first. My number one pick was Jose Barrios. I think just again, this is kind of the scope of the full season to me, where he throws the most innings on the team. He, wins the April pitcher of the month. He has like the really strong finish, kind of same thing, right? Where, the middle of the year was really poor for him. But I think, we think back to April, and I think the word Cy Young may have come up when we were talking about Jose Barrios through the first month because,
That
you
that
know,
might have been a little naive.
well, I mean, again, we have access to the peripherals, and I don't think that we're looking at Jose Barrios and his sub two ERA in March and April and thinking, yeah, this guy's gonna finish the year as Pedro Martinez, 2000 Pedro Martinez. We're not thinking that, but to me, he has that awesome opening month where he has the sub two ERA, wins pitcher of the month, and then he comes back and has the struggles through May, June, July, where the ERA balloons a little bit. And then in August and September, he was just awesome. I mean, even I think the peripheral stuff in August and September were really good, and the strikeouts started to pile up again. To me, I obviously Bowden was my second place pick, and what he did was unbelievable in the second half. I just think the body of work for Barrios and being able to give the 200 innings and be like an above average starter throughout that time, I think was really important, and that's kind of why he ended up as my number one pick on this ballot. I think it's probably, you know, we see this debate with Cy Young all the time, right? Like, I mean, innings versus efficiency in those innings. I think if you look at Bowden Francis versus Barrios, if you're looking at, if you, who you would take in a single game, it might be Bowden Francis, but I just looked at like kind of the whole season. I think what Barrios did was really impressive, and kind of the guy that the Blue Jays generally did pay for, even if the mid-season struggles were a part of them ending up as a disappointing team.
So here's why I put Bowden Francis ahead of Barrios, who I don't know if you mentioned that I had him third on my ballot,
Yeah,
and we'll get into who I had second. But I think that for me, Barrios didn't really do anything in my estimation to differentiate himself from Kevin Gosman, and to a lesser extent Chris Bassett. And Bassett obviously had a really down year, and at the end of it, he had a ERA substantially higher than Jose Barrios. But Kevin Gosman's ERA at the end of the year was almost identical to Barrios. They're in very similar company. And the other thing is that, you know, there were periods where I think Kevin Gosman looked like Kevin Gosman. Even at Barrios' best, it was not domination. It was a lot of getting the bounces and being fortunate. Now, to an extent, Bowden Francis also had that experience, but Bowden Francis had a ridiculous couple stretches where he almost no hits two teams, right? Whereas I think for Barrios, maybe it's just a matter of that it was April and it's been so long ago. It's hard to remember, but it never felt like he was the ace at any point in the season. I feel like
Yeah, I mean, it's fair, right? Like it's a conversation of like you look at, kind of what you want from your pitcher, right? Like, I mean, I think the modern day baseball world, you look at a pitcher and Barrios didn't reach the requisite. I think like a 20% strikeout rate is probably where a pitcher, the least amount that a pitcher should kind of have for what you're looking at to kind of on your roster. And Barrios falls just short of that. But I do think kind of one thing that impressed me with him this season is when it was going well was just the overall command and being able to put the ball where he wants. And I know like soft contact, you can debate how valuable that is in today's world, but I think generating soft contact was a large part of what he did during those successful stretches. So, that's kind of why I went with him. I think the body of work and being able to do that for the full season is why I went with him number one. Of course, I had Francis number two because his second half was unbelievable. And if he had maybe given 150 innings with that, he probably would have been my pick.
probably, yeah, but it just didn't have the sample size, right?
Yeah, yeah. So based on our ballots, Francis finished one, Barrios finishes two, and based on you having a different player number two and me having a different player number three, our third place finisher is Yusei Kikuchi.
I'm surprised you didn't have Kikuchi on your list because Kikuchi to me was more of an ace for this Blue Jays team than Barrios ever was. I thought Kikuchi had a really strong year, basically until he got traded. Maybe some of the run prevention wasn't as effective as you'd want it to be, but he was racking up the strikeouts. His command was as good as it's ever been as a Blue Jay. Like this guy would have probably started game one of the playoffs for the Blue Jays if he sticks around and you know sees his way through it. So who did you have?
I put Kevin Gausman third. Um, again, I think just body work stuff, kind of the same vein where Gausman finishes with 180 innings for this team. He, like you mentioned, I think there were some stretches where he looked more like the Kevin Gausman that we expected to have this year. But at the same time, I'll look ahead a little bit. I also considered putting him on my most disappointing ballot because listening back to our season preview a little bit, and we were talking about, where is he going to finish in the Cy Young voting? And for him to have the year that he did when the expectations were, is he going to be a top five Cy Young finisher again? I think is a little bit disappointing, but I do think for him to kind of grind through it and give them as many innings as he did, and kind of I think pitch a little bit differently this year, is kind of why I decided to go with him over Kikuchi again. Like I mean, one game. If I was going with one pitcher this year between Kikuchi and Gosman, I'm probably picking Kikuchi. But I think Gosman had a couple moments. The two complete games, first complete game shutout of his career. Um, yeah, I just think was enough for me to kind of have him as third place on mine behind Barrios and Francis, and obviously Kikuchi not getting to finish the year with Toronto kind of plays into that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. Like it's kind of the same penalty that I almost kind of gave to Jimmy Garcia, right? So it's not the
Yeah.
most unfathomable thing. I think that's probably roughly fair. To me, I just valued the heights that Kikuchi reached, especially relative to expectations too. I think that's part of the equation here as well.
Yeah, for sure. It's it's a debate, but nonetheless, congratulations to Bowden Francis. You are the Birdy winner for the 2024 Blue Jays Pitcher of the Year.
You can expect something in the mail, maybe.
We're open to sponsors. All right, let's
Anyways,
let's move on. Let's go to hitter of the year as we kind of move through this here. I bet you can guess who this is going to be, but of course, number one on both of our ballots is Vladimir Guerrero Jr. I'm just going to pound through all of them here, and then we can kind of discuss after. Both of us had the same number two in Spencer Horwitz, and then we differed in number three. And I really struggled on this one. I debated to go with the guy who you put at third, which was Ernie Clement, but ultimately I went with Dalton Varsho, which, again, I think the third selection for this was very difficult. And finding a guy who, one, played enough to make their contributions worth it to be on this list, and two, had a good enough of an offensive season was really difficult.
Yeah, this is not a team that was renowned for its offense. Should we wax poetic about Vladdy here for another episode for another minute or two?
Well, I
Because I
I
mean,
think we're gonna have Vladdy on a couple other ballots coming up. So let's leave the Vlad talk a little bit, and let's go into Horwitz, because I think he, Horwitz, and then the kind of the third place stuff there, because I think it's really an interesting group of players. I mean, did you have any other considerations for that third place spot?
I think similar to you, right? I looked around, like this team had two guys at the end of the year with the OPS plus over 100, I think, right? It was Vlad and Horwitz.
Yeah.
This was not a team that could hit. So, I mean, there was some brief consideration given to Varsho, to Ernie Clement, obviously got the vote, to IKF, excuse me. Um, but again, like he only played half the year for the Blue Jays. Like, how much of that could really make him the hitter of the year? If he stuck around, he probably ends up second or third, but just wasn't gonna get that vote based on how much he played for the Blue Jays. I think for Horwitz, huge development, enormous
Yeah.
development that he's a major league hitter, because last year he looked pretty fringy at times, and especially as a first baseman, right? He seemed like work depth, and we talked about it at times, even during spring training and stuff, that he was probably org depth. And the conversation was kind of like, well, how much of a difference is there really between bringing up Vogelbach or Votto as opposed to Horwitz for the 26th man spot? Now, of course, now we see Horwitz is kind of a second baseman. Not really, but like he's got a little bit more positional versatility, and he's one of the Blue Jays' better hitters. Now, the question is he A, going to repeat that next year? And B, is he going to repeat that as part of the Blue Jays next year? Because it seems like he's a popular candidate to maybe sell high on.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of Spencer Horwitz for Brent Rooker conversations, and I don't think that's gonna happen. Brent Rooker is like one of the best 10 hitters in baseball, and Spencer Horwitz is 26.
Yeah, if you're getting Brent Rooker, who's, I mean, in theory is a guy that'd be great to go after, you're giving up, Bloss,
More than
Tiedemann,
Horwitz.
or
Like you're giving
Elvis,
up,
something
yeah.
like that. It looks a lot more like the Donaldson trade than the Matt Chapman trade. And the Matt Chapman trade is headlined by a much more substantial return than a 26-year-old non-positional first baseman.
Yeah, not to disparage what Horwitz did this year. He was
Oh, he
excellent.
was he was
He was
amazing.
amazing. And you know what? I think that the big thing is like him being able to hit 12 home runs in 97 games, right? Like that was not the expectation for him. And I think it's just really impressive that he tapped into that power and kind of found his way as like this dude that's just gonna hit against righties no matter what.
Well, here's a fun thought. We have spent numerous episodes, we've texted about this how many times, that the Blue Jays outside of Carlos Delgado are a
Yeah.
absolute catastrophe in terms of historically talented left-handed hitters. Horwitz only needs to put together probably like three more of seasons like this, if that, to end up a top five left-handed hitter in Blue Jays history.
Yeah.
So, like, he was good this year, like really good this
Yeah.
year. I think it was a 126 OPS plus, I think is the
I
number I
got
was
him
looking up for here.
127 WRC plus, so I would
WRC
bet the
plus.
OPS plus is right there. Yeah.
So yeah, so like he was a great part of this team and a really important part of this team, and is to me a guy not that you can build around, but like he's exactly the kind of guy that you want as an option to have for your team down the lineup in the 5, 6, 7 spot. Like he is not a core piece, but he's part of this team.
All right, let me get your thoughts on Ernie Clement as your third place guy, because I almost went with Ernie Clement and then I decided to go with Varsho. Just, some of the power and kind of the stuff there. And like, I mean, that one stretch that he had in the middle of the year where he had like 6 home runs in 10 games or whatever, like looking for anything to find a third place guy. But what made you go with Ernie for third?
I think for me, just in terms of the pure like hit tool, because they were very similar in terms of Clement and Varsho in terms of just actual like what their production translated into, and the way they went about doing so wasn't a one-to-one comparison. Obviously, more power coming from Varsho, Clement, one of the elite contact guys in the league. I just have never been a huge fan of guys that strike out at huge clips, and that's always kind of just been Varsho's game. And say what you will about Varsho, and say what you will about whether he's been worthwhile in terms of the trade return. Clement, again, relative to expectations, has been nothing but positive news for the Blue Jays. And the way he also attacks the game in terms of, the bat to ball skills is something that I kind of enjoy as opposed to a guy that strikes out at a 28% clip or something crazy like that. So to me, that was why I ultimately gave the nod to Ernie Clement. But uh, there was definitely a period in there where Varsho was giving consideration, but it feels a lot like he's more of a defense guy, which isn't a grand revelation. But I gave him some love there in other places.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to get your thoughts on Clement because this is the only time that he showed up. But I think a guy who is well deserving of kind of some recognition. I think there's a good chance that he wins the Gold Glove at third base. And just a really great story for the Blue Jays, really great development story. Obviously, at the beginning of the year, you're debating whether it's going to be him or Santiago Espinal, and obviously they made the right choice there to go with Ernie and kind of have him turn into this guy that, like I think you mentioned, like the very unique hit profile. I think there's like two guys that struck out less in baseball than he did, and that's like the Luis Arias tier of hitters. So really fun there, really great season from Ernie, and I think some well-deserved love from you on the ballot.
Absolutely.
All right, let's go. Let's do our MVP because I think it kind of caps off like our specific player awards outside of, some of the ones that we'll finish with. But obviously, MVP, not a shock here. We actually both had the same number one and then had different players for number two and number three. So number one on both of our ballots, congratulations to our Birdy MVP, the Toronto Blue Jays 2024 most valuable player. It is Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Now I think we can maybe wax a little bit of poetic about him.
Yeah, this kid's sick. Extend this man yesterday. This guy, I mean, it's not a blank check because that's not really how it works, but anything short of a blank check, it's his. Give him the kingdom, give him the keys to the castle, give him whatever you got to give him. Extend Vladimir Guerrero Jr. because he is a foundational piece of a championship contending team. He is a top 5 hitter in baseball. He is a top 1 personality in baseball. He is a really sick baseball player that is a Toronto Blue Jay and is living up to all of the hype that was back in 2017, 2018, 2019. He's coming up as the number 1 prospect in baseball. And there's been ebbs and flows. The 2021 season, he looks like an MVP and he probably wins it if one Shohei Ohtani doesn't break out at the same time. Then, he sputters a little in 22 and then he really sputters in 23. And even us, we're kind of doubting him a lot. And there's an episode I remember we derisively call him Vladdy Arias. And, he cuts his hair and all of a sudden he is literally his father, but better. Well, maybe not better, but he was literally one of the best hitters on the planet from basically like June 30th onwards and is comfortably the most valuable player on this Toronto Blue Jays team.
Yeah, I just having it up here. I have our last year's ballot from 2023, and he did not appear on any of our 2023 MVP ballots, right? And even hitter of the year, he only got one vote last season. So just the dramatic turnaround this season. Obviously, the Blue Jays were an 88 loss team, so being MVP of that is maybe not the most significant, but I mean, he was the light in the darkness for this Blue Jays team. And
Yeah, there's a lot of guys you can fault for this. He's not one of them.
no, his season was incredible. He completely reshaped the narrative around him after difficult 2023, like we'd mentioned. And it's just been amazing to watch the transformation. And obviously, I've talked about it on the pod. Just the maturity, the difference that he took the step he took as a leader this year, I think was really important, or at least a visible leader to us on the outside looking in. And just the approach of the play was great. And I think what he did this season, the most important thing that he did this season is that he gave you confidence that this is going to stick going forward, right? For a guy who
100%.
kind of had like some of the ups and downs, but for him to be able to come out and have just such an overwhelming performance that you feel like it's not just a 1 year thing, I think is really important. And obviously, there was nobody better on the Blue Jays this year. If you had to, poll, I think 100, 1,000, 10,000 Blue Jays fans, I think if they were voting on this, he would be a near unanimous MVP, if not unanimous for however many people that you want to ask.
Yeah, it's hard to find unanimity basically anywhere on the planet, but among Blue Jays fans, there's not a lot of other guys that quite captured the fan base's imagination the way that Vladimir Guerrero Jr. did this year.
Yeah, he's incredible, and there's going to be some more hardware coming his way later in this episode. So let's move on. The rest of our ballots, I think it's kind of funny to see, like, I think that you and I we're generally pretty aligned at the top of things, but then as we move down, you can kind of see like the differences in where we go. And so for your second place MVP vote, it was Spencer Horwitz, who we just talked about as our second place hitter of the year. Mine was Jose Barrios, who of course I voted as the pitcher of the year and kind of gave my case there. For your number three, it was Bowden Francis, who obviously won our pitcher of the year, and we talked in length there. And then my number three was Dalton Varsho, where I leaned on a little bit of the defense, I think, for that. And do you remember the stretch in the middle of the year where it seemed like Varsho was just making a spectacular catch every game?
Oh yeah, well we'll get into that because that was kind of the inspiration behind another vote that I
Yeah,
tossed his way. But
it's funny
he,
because you put him in that category and I did not.
that's pretty funny actually. I guess
Um,
we'll get into that one, but that's maybe that's like a not a pity vote, but that feels a little bit like I got to give you a little bit of love too because he I didn't give Dalton Varsho a ton of love in our balloting here, but like he was basically what you could ask of him. I think he was a 4-win player this year.
yeah, I think if you go by Fangraphs, it's 3.3. If you go by Baseball Reference, it's a little bit different. But um, I think we've talked about all these players already, so we kind of understand like where we're at with each of them. I always joke that I hate the Toronto Blue Jays for turning me into like a defense guy for caring about defense, right? Like considering that. But
Considering that
no,
all defense stats are fake, yeah, I mean, I guess.
yeah. Varsho, I think he'll likely win the center field Gold Glove. The obviously the Kevin Kiermaier trade goes a long way into that. Of course, Jaron Duran is also in consideration for that, but I think if Dalton Varsho doesn't win, just based on the fact that he, I believe, had seen like the same DRS as Jaron Duran, despite playing like 200 less innings, I think it'll be a shame if he doesn't win that award.
Yeah, he'll win. He'll win either center field or left field, or wouldn't it be fun if he won both? Because
Yeah,
he's
like
definitely in the
when JD
mix.
Martinez won outfield Silver Slugger and designated hitter Silver Slugger,
I
that
mean,
would be
listen,
so crazy.
that would be fun.
That would be Stephen Kwan is really good as well in left field, but Varsho did beat him out in DRS in left field this season. And Dalton Varsho, I just pulled it up here. Dalton Varsho finished second in outfield DRS. He had 12 in 404 innings, and the number one finisher was Riley Green, who had 14 in 700 innings.
Yeah, it's a little bit different there, almost twice as much, right? Like
That's crazy.
that's this guy. This guy, for all his warts, this guy knows how to catch a baseball.
That guy, he runs him down. He runs it down really, really well.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Any other comments on MVP from you?
I think just generally we kind of have gotten into most of the guys. I gave Vladdy his flowers, and we talked about Horwitz and Bowden Francis. Like to me, those three guys, those three guys to me are the standouts to me. And I mean, I know your ballot was a little different than mine. I know you gave Varsho the love, and I think to me, I mean, do we want to get into kind of where I gave Varsho the love? Because that to me is a
Yeah,
little bit
I
more
was just
kind
gonna
of.
ask, like, was there anybody else that you considered on your MVP ballot, or was it pretty straightforward, those three?
I think it was pretty much those three. Like again, I gave a little bit of consideration maybe to like I wasn't going to give any consideration to Kikuchi, who was second for my pitcher of the year. I wasn't going to give any consideration to Barrios for third, and then beyond that, I wasn't going to give Clement. So it was kind of like those three, and not a whole lot else.
Yeah. All right, let's move on. Excuse me. Let's move on to our most enjoyable player to watch for
There we
this
go. There
season.
we go.
Congratulations once again, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., you won the award, and he is a three-time Birdie winner now. Um, yeah, like I mean, we talked about it with MVP, but man, like just so fun to watch what he did in the box this year. I think like just the incredible thing to me is watching his at bats this year. I'm like, man, why would you even throw this dude a strike? Because it
Yeah,
seemed like every time he got a pitch over the heart of the plate, he was ripping it.
destroyed. He was
Yeah,
crushing baseballs all year. The exit velo was like up from last year, even, which is saying something because even when he wasn't good, he was still crushing baseballs.
yeah,
Like this guy looks like a monster for years. He's only 25. Only 25.
yeah.
Extend him immediately.
Yeah, like he's the dude that you look at and like the combination of hit tool with power. Um, it was just a really incredible season, and you know it was a lot of fun to watch. You know, for a Blue Jays team that lacked fun things to watch, he was it. He
He
was the
was he
one
was
thing.
the one
You
for
know how
sure.
right now people are making fun of like the Fox or is it the ESPN? I don't like somebody
Yeah,
whoever has
yeah,
the
yeah.
Shohei Ohtani like
Shohei
six
Ohtani three at
six
bats
batters
away.
away. Yeah, like
Yeah, well, that
the
was Vladdy all
Sportsnet
year.
Sportsnet got to start pulling that out for Vladdy. I think that'd be pretty funny.
That seems reasonable. That seems about right.
All right, let's go through the rest of our ballots here. So for most enjoyable to watch, I gave Bowden Francis my second place vote, and you gave him your third place vote. Your second place vote went to Dalton Varsho,
There we go.
and my third place vote went to Jimmy Garcia.
Jimmy, look at Jimmy getting some love there. That's fun.
Yeah,
Let's
Jimmy
you
got
want to give Jimmy his flowers here?
I mean, I feel like I kind of did with reliever of the year, but I just think the pure dominance that he showed with the Blue Jays was pretty incredible. You know, for a dude to come in and like not give up home runs, strike out the world, and not really walk anybody. I mean, it's all that you can ask from a reliever, and for a team that lacked like the maybe him falling at number three on my ballot was just a product of watching this Blue Jays bullpen over the course of the year.
And
And
wanting to tear out your eyeballs.
yes, I think, it's crazy when you think about it. Like he had a 36.5% K rate and a 7% walk rate. Like he should have been the best reliever traded at the deadline. And obviously there were some struggles once he got to Seattle and the injury and all that stuff. But I just think the dominance that he showed was really amazing. And it was really fun to watch when he came into games, I think.
For sure. You alluded to it a little earlier, but Varsho was the guy that I put number two there. And basically, I put him there for that 1 week where he was just crashing into walls, left, right, and center, literally, and was just a menace out there in terms of both the stick. Because I think right around then as well, it might not have been totally overlapping, but he was really feeling himself with the bat. And shortly, either before or after, he was really feeling himself with the glove, making all these incredible catches. So to me, that's why I had him as my number two behind Vladdy, just because in terms of like the electricity of it, I remember saying this at the beginning of the 23 season when they brought in Kevin Kiermaier, who replaced, I guess it would have been George Springer, but like an aging version of him to play center field. And it was kind of like you forget what it's like having an uber athletic like Hoover out there in center field. There's not a lot more in terms of electric positions, right? You think of the diving, the leaping catches, the getting to baseballs, and you're kind of like, how did he do that? You think back to the days of those 2015 Blue Jays, and you've got these Kevin Kiermaier unbelievable catches, and you think of him scaling the wall in left field, right? And then of course there's a bit of a lull there where he gets traded and you're trotting out like Randall Grichuk in center and he's not a center fielder, right? So there was a period there where the defense in center kind of wavers. And to go back from those guys to first Kiermaier and then Varsho, it just reminds you how electric center field
Yeah.
defense can be. And that's why I had Varsho and all of his incredible stuff as my pick for the second most enjoyable player to watch behind the sheer dominance of Vlad Guerrero Jr.
Yeah, I think too, like once Varsho got hurt and was out for the year, you kind of saw like a little bit of that drop off, right? I mean, like Loperfido was pretty solid in center as well, but like seeing some of the balls that fall, some of the balls that are like going up against the wall, and you're like, oh man, Varsho like would have ran through the wall to catch that,
Well,
right?
there
Like
was
kind
one
of the
play
thing.
where Jonathan Clase had a ball, I think, go off his glove, or maybe he just
Yeah,
totally dropped it. And the first thought that comes to mind is that's Varsho is automatic.
yeah, yeah. So, I think Varsho probably would have been like fourth on my ballot for most enjoyable to watch. It's kind of just the thing in there where I like the defense is really fun to watch, and he was great at it. So let's keep it moving here. Let's flip a little bit to I guess maybe one of the more negative categories on our ballot, but we have the biggest disappointment of the 2024 season. And I think our ballots are kind of fun, very a little bit different. So our winner is Bo Bichette. He finished first on my ballot, second on yours. Um, First on your ballot was the bullpen as a whole, which I think is relatively fair. But what made you go with the bullpen over Bo?
Yeah, I mean, listen, like, is it a real answer? Like, maybe not. I mean, could I have picked a specific player? Probably, and I did in the third slot, and we'll get to that. But yeah, the fact that this bullpen was so historically bad in the context of the Toronto Blue Jays as a franchise, what, almost 50 years of existence, that is just incredible. And don't forget, we came into the year and there was talk that this would be a top five, top 10 bullpen in baseball because they basically went 1 through 7 in terms of talented guys. Like the whole back end of the bullpen looked really good. You had a lot of really exciting guys. In addition to that, you had some depth in the high minors and guys like Zach Pop and Nate Pearson that, although obviously not high leverage guys, looked like they could maybe fill in a pinch in more of a long relief or maybe like a middle relief role, right? And A through Z, it sucked. The whole bullpen just stank up the joint, and it didn't single handedly sink the season. But there's a reason that the Blue Jays now go into this off season and are basically going to have to remake their bullpen from scratch almost.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't have any bullpen stuff in any of my picks for this category. I think I went more like focused on the player direction. So I mean, if you wanted to go with any of those guys, I think that's fair for sure. Bo, I think just, he's an all-star level player who performed at I don't even know, like not replacement level, not like AAA level, right? Like it was a really, really bad season. And I think the injury goes into that, him being the most disappointing. I think part of the disappointment too is his comeback being cut short at the end of the year. I think just overall, just a whole like nothing burger waste of a season for Bo Bichette, and that's probably what the most disappointing factor is there.
Yeah, and that's probably reasonable, right? Like I could have put Bo in the one spot, and I would have been
Yeah,
completely comfortable doing so. He was not much better than the bullpen in terms of relative to expectations. And I give a lot more kind of leeway to him, I guess, just because of all the injuries. Whereas I feel like
yeah,
with the bullpen, it just completely imploded for a lot of inexplicable reasons. But again, like for Bo, you come into the season expecting him to be like a 5 win player, a 4 win player, like a key part of a team that's making a playoff push. And for him to just not be a factor at all, and even when healthy, so to speak, although who knows if he was ever really healthy, he wasn't a contributor. He was mediocre fielding, light hitting, power lacking shortstop that was not effective when called upon. And as a result, he now heads into 2025 with a lot of question marks. I would argue more than Vlad did at this time last year.
yeah. No, 100%. It was a rough year, and there's gonna be some interesting decisions ahead for the Blue Jays when it comes to Bo Bichette for sure.
Yeah, I mean, like there's this talk about extend Vlad and all that. Is there a universe that Bo is even extended next year? Like
Hey
we've had
man,
this
maybe
discussion, but
you want to buy low on that.
do you want to
But
buy
I mean,
low on
Bo's not signing a contract right now.
yeah, I don't know, man. The Chris Bryantification of Bo Bichette, man. I can't pass up an opportunity to say that one more time this year. But this is not a guy that I have a lot of confidence in terms of immediate short term. But I guess we'll see what next year brings because there's only up to go from here.
Yeah, for sure. So my second place on this was George Springer. Same thing as Bo, right? Like, I mean, obviously the injury doesn't play in, but I think just the disappointment of him, like, not really even having, like, he had that, like, couple weeks where he was hot. But other than that, he was looked barely cooked the entire season. And I think that's pretty disappointing just to see the development there. And obviously you hope that maybe he can kind of turn back Father Time a little bit over the offseason and come back and help the Blue Jays contend next season. But based on what we just watched, I feel like it's pretty unrealistic to expect a young George Springer to show up ever again, and it might have to be a totally different reinvention for him of himself as a player to kind of extend his major league timeline as an effective player.
Yeah, we dropped a Jose Abreu comp, I feel like, at some
Last
point,
week,
either
yeah,
last episode or something. Yeah. Like this is not a great development. I mean, it's 2 straight years of decline for him, right? Like,
yeah,
where is your concern for him? Because to me, it's extremely high.
yeah. I honestly like I couldn't be really more concerned about what the next couple of years, and I think the Jose Abreu situation is a very dramatic example, but if they want to contend next year, the leash has to be pretty short.
Yeah. Like I'm not sure exactly what happens, but it's a dangerous proposition for the Blue Jays to lean heavily on George Springer in 2025. I just don't know if they're gonna have a choice.
Yeah, yeah, no, exactly right. Like, I mean, they're going to have to do it at least, give it a shot at the beginning of the year, and then if you have to turn him into like a bench player, I mean, that's a
That's
totally
not
different
great either.
conversation.
That's
Yeah,
really not great either.
that's a topic for 2025. That's a bridge to cross when we get there. So let's keep it moving. Number three on our ballots. Yours was Jordan Romano. Mine was Joey Votto. Totally different scenarios, I think, but two Canadians, which is a coincidence, but kind of funny, I suppose.
I guess so. I don't know. I think for me, Romano was the easy pick here, just based on the fact that he comes into the year, and I think by most respects was considered a top closer in baseball in terms of some of the best guys, right? Like I know there's a lot of call it doubt, call it whatever you want, but like to me, he was always kind of considered like worse than he actually was, right? Like he's consistently been a really really talented guy, consistently been a really really good reliever, and has kind of been given the short end of the stick. I feel like by a lot of people just based on the fact that they don't love him for one reason or another, and there's this he's not a World Series level closer, but he had so much success in the years prior to this that I'm just so shocked. And obviously the elbow is the reason, but I'm so shocked by how dramatic his fall off was this year.
Yeah, I mean, like obviously disappointing year for him. I think like 13 innings is really tough to look at and kind of see um what he's going to be next year. I think the injuries really hurt him like the home run rate spiking as much as it did for him. I think that's unsustainable, or at least you hope it's unsustainable. And next year, I mean, we talked about it a little bit where he has the ARB deal coming up where it's like 7.75 million is the projection, and you can non-tender him and try and bring him back, but how
Someone
many
someone gives them more. Someone gives them more. Someone 100% gives them like a 10 or something if he hits the market. But that's the problem, right? Like he's not worth 7. He's not worth 10,
yeah,
but
I
there's too much to bet on.
yeah, it's gonna that's one of the toughest decisions I think they have to make. And Ross Atkins was asked if he's gonna be their closer in 2025, and he kind of gave a non-committal answer, right? So
How could you
um
how could you
I
possibly
mean,
commit to
yeah,
him?
like I don't think that you can roll into 2025 planning for him to be the same guy that he was before this
No.
year.
No, no
So
chance.
So if he gets non-tendered, I wouldn't be surprised. If they tender the deal, also wouldn't be surprised. But 7.75 million is a large chunk of change when you got to remake the entire pen.
Yeah.
Yeah, number three on my ballot, Joey Votto. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Was I thought it would have been a really fun story for him to ride off into the sunset with the Blue Jays, whether that was with them as a competitive team or not. Just disappointing that he wasn't able to make it up, and obviously the that didn't contribute to the Blue Jays being a below average team or a not a winning team in 2024. But I think just a disappointing story overall, and there were more disappointing stories for the 24 Blue Jays on the field. But I figured show Votto some love. Figure it's a part of the 2024 narrative of the Blue Jays that this former MVP that they signed that could have been maybe like a late season addition just didn't have it.
Yeah, just no fairy tale ending, which is, unfortunate fact of life there. I guess, I think relative to expectations, again, I've talked about that a couple times. Expectations were almost non-existent in terms of what you're hoping to get out of him. I mean, they signed him right at the end of spring training anyways, right? Like he was behind the eight ball kind of from the start,
Yeah.
or maybe it was the end of kind of the offseason. Point being that he was clearly not a number one option for this team.
Yeah.
And unfortunately wasn't able to make it back to the big leagues with them.
Yep. All right, let's keep it rolling with our we'll say our less than positive categories. So we have our last two cats coming up here. First one is the worst memory of the 2024 Blue Jays season, and I didn't necessarily rank these ones or give them kind of a final ballot because I just think us listing them out is good enough. We only had one actually cross ballot or same picks, and that was being no hit by Ronel Blanco early in the season. Um, I think your honorable mention, actually, I didn't think about your honorable mention, which was, of course, the failed Shohei Ohtani chase. I think that was actually a really good pick because it kind of just set the season up for the disappointment that was. I'm just going to list everything that we had, and we can kind of pick and choose what we want to discuss. But the no hit by Ronel Blanco, you had the pitching injuries and the trade deadline, and I had the Aurelvis Martinez suspension and the major loss. And you remember in the middle of the year when they had like that soft stretch of schedule,
Oh yeah.
and we
Oh
called it
yeah.
the stretch
The
to save
stretch to
this
save the season,
the
and they
stretch to
did
save the
not.
season. And I have the big comeback by the Tigers in that
Yeah.
like specific, but I just think them being like not competitive or like not taking advantage of that as like one of the worst memories of the year.
That's a good choice. I didn't remember that, but that's a really good choice in my opinion. Because that, we called it the stretch to save the season, and it didn't save the season, and then the season died. Like it kind of was exactly what we said it was gonna be. I think that's a good pick. We both had the no hitter, and I mean, we had that emergency episode, and we were all miffy and pissed, and we're like, "Oh God, is this team screwed?" Um, I mean, the all the TJs is kind of, I feel like a worse memory. It's kind of like a couple things coagulated into one, kind of consolidated into one, but it all kind of happened kind of bang, bang, bang pretty quickly. And it was Tiedemann and then Manoah and then Morales, like everything with regards to pitching depth in this organization, all the excitement like sucked out of the air. Because all these young guys, and Manoah is only kind of in that category, but to an extent falls under the same, relatively speaking, description. Um, just it all went sideways. It all went sour, and all these guys getting hurt, just like blow after blow after blow, and it kind of very quickly became clear that not only was this team lacking in terms of talent at the major league level, it was the minor league level was not going to have the kind of year that saw them shoot up from a bottom third to a top third system in baseball.
Yeah, it's obviously a season where there were a lot of tough individual memories and they kind of all blend together. So picking out individual ones was tough. And I think that, surely us picking what we did probably is, in ways like kind of off-field stuff, right? Like, I mean, obviously the no-hitter is significant early in the season of like a kind of a sign of things to come.
Yeah.
The pitching injuries is fairly an organizational wide issue that really screwed them over for pitching depth at the minor league level and kind of took away any potential positive stories. I think the Barriera and Morotis ones were really significant as far as minor league stories. Obviously Manoah too, same thing, where at the major league level he looked all right, didn't look great. That obviously this is the only time that we mention him here, but a really important story as well, I think, for his development, where the 2023 season was so far off the rails for him, and you just didn't know what to expect in 2024. And I think he looked better than at least I expected. So for him to have the year cut short was really disappointing and um not in line with what you would want for the Blue Jays season. And then the trade deadline, the Irrelva suspension, like all this stuff that just kind of piled into the pile of crap that was the season.
Yes, it was not a fun one. Mostly. There were moments though. There were moments.
Yes, let's move on to that. Let's finish on a positive. This is our last category, the best memory of the Blue Jays season. And again, I didn't quite rank this one because, we kind of like we're speaking different languages, but we have the same ideas. So for you had Bowden Francis no hit bids as your number one. I called it the Francis Steve run. Um as my number one, and then we both kind of had Vlad. You had the Vlad haircut specifically. I put Vlad July and August, but you put the haircut, which led to the July and August. So I mean, you know, kind of fun difference there. And then you put the trade deadline here as well as
Yes.
for your worst memories. So I mean, I can kind of understand where you're coming from, but we'll get into that. And then again, like kind of searching, I put like the Davis Schneider City Connect walk off when they debuted the City Connect and played like
Yeah, yeah.
25 innings before Davis Schneider hit the walk off home run, which I think like fun moment, the City Connect thing where we were like kind of all locked into that for a while because it was a little off-field distraction type thing. But yeah, I mean, a couple fun moments for sure. But why don't we get into Bound Francis Steve run? I mean, why did you pick that as your number one over Vlad getting his haircut?
Over Vlad getting his haircut. So I actually remember exactly where I was during that second no bid. And that's why I kind of put in brackets there, the second one specifically. So I was on the bus headed down to my girlfriend's place. And I remember watching it and being like, I need to make sure that I don't miss this because, like, I'm going to be walking into her place in another minute or two. I need to make sure that I've got it on my phone and then I need to get it on the TV immediately. And so I'm keeping a really close eye. I'm like kind of going back and forth. I'm texting her, I'm on the way and I'm close and this and that. And it was like, it felt like I was witnessing like history. Like, I haven't been alive for a Blue Jays no hitter. I don't think you have either, right? Like, I don't have the only time I remember a Blue Jay really well, like going deep and going the distance and almost having one, the Brandon Morrow game, and I
Yeah.
believe it was 2010. And Marco Estrada at times flirted with no-nos. There have been other times where Blue Jays pitchers have come close-ish, but you know, to come within an out of it, right? Like that, or to come so cripplingly close. Was it an out away? I don't remember if it was
Well,
an
it
out
was
away.
it was both times he goes into the ninth and then gives up a
Sorry,
leadoff
yeah. So
home run.
it wasn't an out away. Excuse me. Yes. But
Three outs
to
away.
be 3 outs away. But the point stands of it just being like so close, right?
Yeah.
Um, Brandon Morrow is the only one that I really like have a recollection of from my childhood. And I remember where I was for that too, right? So like to have especially the second bout in Francis no, you know, within a whisker and to lose it in the ninth inning, like obviously part of that was disappointing, but I just remember this like sense of excitement that I didn't feel
Yeah.
almost all season. And Bowden Francis was the facilitator of that.
Yeah, I think you look at it and I mean, obviously he doesn't finish either of them. Um, but it was super fun to like be a part of. Obviously, I was working for both of them, so having to like pre-write those stories and being like, "Oh, Blue Jays no hitter," blah blah blah. Like, I mean, obviously you have it ready to go, and then
and then it just falls
It
apart.
falls apart,
Well,
right? I
like
mean,
it, like think about
welcome to behind the curtains of working in
well, a
sports.
little bit. Well,
I
like even just to say like think of like the historic significance, as silly as it sounds, of like even like writing that shell, right? Like, could you
yeah,
imagine you hit the publish button on that? Like
yeah.
that would have been the coolest possible thing.
I think it's funny because like I mean I think that we've talked about this but never on the pod, but somebody's got to release a book of the what if moments of sports, right? Like all these stories that have been written um but never published, right?
For
Bound
sure.
Francis no-hitter. Texas Rangers win the 2011 World Series. David Freese never does the David Freese thing. Like all these moments that come like inches away from happening, like all of those stories are written
They're done.
and they're ready to go. So I think it'd just be like crazy, a lot of fun if there would be like a book of just like, hey, here's these stories that never got to see the light of day, even though they were
Done.
done.
They were ready to go.
Yeah. And so I think those Bowden Francis moments, both of those, like those would be very nice additions to to this book that
Yeah.
I would love to
You
read.
gotta keep that copy in your back pocket, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. It's super fun. Anyways, let's keep moving on. Bowden Francis, I think, just the historical significance of that and those moments really fun. I think that's kind of the same reason why I went number one. And I think for the Blue Jays organization to have like one Dave Stieb do what he did, and then have a guy kind of pitch in like the modern, he's not Dave Stieb probably talent wise, but to kind of have like the modern day tomorrow I'll be perfect
Yeah.
stuff I think is pretty crazy and
Yeah, yeah.
something that it'll be, we'll remember that run forever. So
For sure. For sure.
Vladdy, again, best memory, I think just his general excellence and I don't know if you were there when he got his haircut, as to why you listed that as his as your best memory. Like if you saw the locks fall into the ground.
I remember Hazel May tweeting out the Vlad got his haircut picture and the oh my god, holy smokes.
Yeah.
And then obviously there were all those posts from the immediate aftermath, kind of being like, post since his haircut, this is what he's doing and stuff. So I mean, it's not really his haircut, obviously, that is the memory, so to speak, but it's to me a very it's a singular moment that really I think defines defines kind of his it better defines the memory of the moment than saying his July and his August. But I'll let you kind of take this one because I took
Well,
the Bowden
they
one. You give me the
can we
Vladdy.
petition Fangraphs to have like add in their split section like pre haircut, post
Well, you
haircut?
know what it is? It's they probably got to do like a pre and post like weight, right? Because you drop like 2 pounds of weight with all the hair he
Yeah.
cuts off, right?
Yeah. I wrote down July and August. Like, I mean, I think just for that emergence, like again, the Blue Jays season is generally over at that point. Like you're not really looking towards the playoffs, but I just
They
think,
almost they hunted down 500 at a point.
yeah, they were like what, 2 games back of 500.
I don't know. It was never real. It was never happening.
Again, the Detroit Tigers did it. So anyways, but yeah, so
Happy
I
memories. Happy
happy
memories.
memories. We're on the good memories. Yeah, again, like I think we've given Vlad plenty of attention here where he's, our hitter of the year, MVP, most enjoyable player to watch, and this stretch was just a part of it where he emerges as reemerges, I should say, as one of the best hitters in baseball. And I think it's just was really fun to be able to talk about the excellence that he was providing day in, day out, and at least look forward to watching his at bats every day.
No, for sure. I like couldn't have said it better myself.
All right, let's go into your trade deadline as to why you have it as a best memory and a worst memory.
The catharsis. I think that's basically the way that I would sum it up, right? Like, they're heading into the deadline and, the season's like done. They're cooked. They're selling guys off, right? And I think just the catharsis and the returns also, there was some nice returns in there, at least at the time. Obviously, since then, Bloss didn't really have a great year to end it. And Loperfido looked a little pedestrian at times. And, who knows how good guys like Jonathan Clase are and like remains to be seen. But I just think of like the catharsis of that trade deadline being like, okay, it's just a clean break, just the season's over. You just can watch the team for the fun of it, and it's not like you keep losing and you're clearly it's slipping away and the expectations are playoffs. But at that point, like the playoff expectations were done. I think about, what Twitter was like in August and September versus even like 2023. There was so much more negativity during the 2023 season, I feel like, than the back half of the 2024 season, because there was nothing to be negative about, because there was nothing expectation wise, right? Like, you know, you follow sports because for a variety of reasons, but one of them to ideally see your team win a championship. So to say that watching them flounder in the second half for periods was enjoyable would be obviously just misinformation. But to be able to watch the team and appreciate the things that are going well and to like write off the things that aren't going well because it just doesn't matter at the end, that to me is the catharsis that the trade deadline brought for the Blue Jays. Now, obviously, it's a negative because they traded away guys like Danny Jansen and trading away IKF. I really enjoyed him in his time here. Like there were other guys that they dealt that you enjoyed to watch, but whatever. Like you knew it was coming, and it was just a matter of when, not really if.
Hey, maybe they'll be back. Maybe they'll be back if you're looking for a bright side. They could be bringing back Danny Jansen and Yusei Kikuchi if they really want to.
If they're so inclined. If they're so inclined.
Yes. All right. Well, that wraps up our birdies, our second annual Bird's Eye View Podcast Award winners. Congrats to all the winners. Sorry to all the losers. But yeah, it was quite a season. I think that is pretty much going to do it for our analysis and coverage of the 2024 Toronto Blue Jays season. We do have a couple of minor league reviews coming up with some guests, but I think from here on out we are in off-season mode and looking towards the future. So I before we get out of here, I just want to thank everybody who tuned in over the course of the season. It was a lot of fun to be able to go wire to wire on the year. It was our first full Blue Jays season doing this, and I know Jori and I both really enjoyed it, and thank everybody who took the time to listen to even one episode. It's a lot of fun to be able to do this and put this together on a weekly basis. You got anything you want to say, Jori?
It's the most wonderful time. Off-season content. Here it comes.
Yeah, we is your flight aware account up to date?
It will have to be for this. It'll have to be for the next in the next couple weeks.
Yeah, we'll see. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun. We'll definitely be back with some off season coverage, and we will be we'll be keeping at it. We're not going away. We're gonna keep recording throughout the off season, and hopefully 2025 is a little bit more of an exciting season. With that said, that is going to do it for us here today at the Bird's Eye View podcast. Thank you very much for listening. Make sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons if you're watching on YouTube. You can find us there at the Bird's Eye View pod. If you're listening along on the podcast provider of your choice, make sure to drop a follow and review. If you have any off-season topics that you would like us to discuss or any questions you have for us, or even if you just want to chat a little bit, you can shoot us an email. We're there at birdseyeviewpod@gmail.com. You can follow us all on Twitter. The pod is at BEV_pod. Jori is at Jori Negin-Shecter, and I am at Worden_Zach. Thank you very much for listening.